I'm going first for 2 minutes. I'm going first for 2 minutes, and then.
Hi, Dayna and me. I'm going before them as well.
Okay. You tell me when we start. You start. Okay. Masah al-khair. Good evening. Masah al-khair, good evening, guten Abend to our audiences, physical audience and also digital audience, to our guests and speakers, and to you all. My name is Konrad Ziller, I'm director of the Goethe Institute in Lebanon, and I would like to welcome you for the second Impulse session that takes place within the project ArtEvolution. I'm going to just say 2 sentences about ArtEvolution to contextualize what is happening tonight. It's a project of Goethe that runs over more than a year that supports artistic production of Lebanese artists or Lebanon-based artists through a range of activities. We had an intensive residency at Hamana Artist House. We had a networking and research trip to Germany in selected participants. We will have a small platform, a small festival. Hi. Some of the artists that I just spoke about have arrived. We have a small platform festival in November later this year. And we have these impulse sessions that are curated by Haig Aivazian, who's right next to me, and that we have put under certain themes. And tonight's theme is towards generous institutions, and Marigur will talk about that in a minute. Before she starts, and also welcome to our guests, I quickly would like to thank Mention for hosting us tonight. Team of Mention, my team, obviously, in Goethe Institute, in particular, Robert, and the rest of the team, and you all for coming, and I hope we'll have a lively debate, discussion, thoughtful encounter tonight. Thank you very much. And I pass on the mic to Marigur.
Hello, and very happy to be here for the second Impulse session that will focus on arts institution and their ecosystem, the ecosystem they are part of. And I'm very happy to have with us Haig Aivazian from the Beirut Art Center and Dayna Ash from Haven from Art for Artists, and Adele Jarrar who's with us online, who's a cultural organizer from Palestine. Okay. And so I will first start with a small introduction about the session and the concept behind the session. So first we're departing here, and I wanted to propose the notion of generosity and how, as a value, it can be practiced by arts institutions. And here I want to first give credit to the Documenta 15 artistic team, because they're the one who they're practicing it. And I heard it in one of their boom sessions. And this is the definition that they gave. Generosity, or the willingness to give, forces us to recognize that knowledge is diverse and cannot be owned or claimed. Its practice is in stark opposition to competition, rivalry, and rarity, capitalist values that have come to define contemporary life. So the session is titled Towards Generous Institution, because I want to stress on the work that we still have to do. Arts institutions are a major pillar to the ecosystem. They provide resources, tools, knowledge, and discursive platforms for both the production and the circulation of artistic works. Often they're a link between the artist, the artworks, and the public. And I think these categories can be discussed and redefined. For example, instead of public, can we talk of communities around the institution? Instead of artworks, can we see them as mediated experience a certain form of knowledge? And how can we think of the artist without giving him or her or they the status of the author? There's a lot to unpack there. Throughout the years, questions around institutions, mainly their role, founding, and organizational models, have never ceased to be at the forefront of many discussions. For historical purpose, we can refer to the artistic genre of institutional critique that emerged in the late 60s, or the artistic discourse around the new institutionalism of the late 90s. And today, many, for example, look at how to comment the institution, or at least they examine several of its components in light of the values associated with feminism, degrowth, decolonialism, and environmental justice. To come back to generosity, I find it more fitting as a notion than inclusivity that connotes a position of domination from the institution, placing the institution as the space that holds the proper knowledge and should thus share it and let the other in. Generosity, by implying a practice of care and sharing without necessarily stretching it and corresponding, open more space for resisting the dominant paradigm, especially the values upheld by the neoliberal meta-structures we are in, and that the art institutions sometimes reproduce by favoring cheap labor, productive approach, growth and accumulation of learning and knowledge that could verge as well on extraction and appropriation. So the question we're asking is, what are the ways forward to imagine and practice institutions that are generous toward their communities, able to welcome a multiplicity of stories and pathways? So I will present briefly the participant, the guest of this session, and I also want to stress that they will give short presentation, but we really want to have a discussion as well with the public or with you. So Haig Aivazian is an artist living in Beirut, working across a range of media and modes of address. He delves into the ways in which power embeds, affects and moves people, objects, animals, landscape, and architecture. Aivazian has explored apparatus of control and sovereignty at work in sports, museums, the office, and music, and is currently artistic co-director of the Beirut Art Center. And should I continue? Okay. And then we will have a short presentation by Dayna Ash, who's a cultural and social activist, writer, and the founder and executive director of Haig for Artists, a non-profit feminist art organization based in Beirut that works at the intersection of art activism, campaigning and advocating for women's and queer rights. And with us, there's also Adele Jarrar joining us from Ramallah, who's an art and cultural worker, curator and writer, who obtained her BA in architecture from Beirut University in 2016 and is currently completing her MA degree in arts and cultural management at the Hana Universitat. So Jarrar has had wide-ranging experience in design, digital archiving, research, podcast production, writing, and curation. And most recently, she curated But These Forms Need to Be Created at the Haig Cultural Center. And the Memory from Tomorrow, commissioned by the French German Cultural Center. Okay, so we'll start with Haig.
Hi. Hello? Can everybody hear me okay? So I'll start with the whole thing. I'll try and be sort of brief about it. Like Marinur said, hopefully we can elaborate on some of the things that I'll try and touch on through discussion. I'll start by quickly presenting the BAC in a historical manner, what the BAC from its founding in 2009 has been and the role that it has played. It's a sort of particular structure in one sense and not so particular in another. In a Lebanese sense, it's particular because there's no other structure like it. Internationally, I think it's something similar to like a Kunsthalle or a Kunstverein. It's a space for contemporary artistic practices and focused on exhibitions, but without a collection of its own. Since 2009, I think that the kind of main principle of the space has been to give access to international artists and artistic practices that a Lebanese audience would not necessarily have access to otherwise. So to bring, quote unquote, known names to the city, providing them a platform to elaborate solo and sometimes group exhibitions with sort of periodic investments in more emerging practices, mainly through an annual exhibition that was called Exposure, which was a group exhibition that sort of provided a platform for younger local artists. I guess I should note also that this is quote-unquote the new space for the BAC. It moved, I guess, a couple of years ago from just down the street. And from the kind of moment we were conceptualizing the proposal, my co-director Ahmed Hussein and I, we immediately had an interest in the surroundings. So we were already looking outside of the institution because the location of the building itself is quite loaded. It's literally across the street. This is from the rooftop of the building. So it's literally across the street from a highway that runs parallel to the Beirut River, which is a kind of environmental disaster, a kind of a live environmental disaster. And also parallel to the highway and the river is Su al-Ahad, or the Sunday market, which is a popular market in Beirut, which mainly houses stands that are run by migrant, mainly Syrian owners. And so already we had these two very kind of loaded questions, one of the environment and the politics of environment that have been very present in the last few years in Lebanon and in Beirut in particular. And the area is also highly policed with identity controls, like controlling papers, mainly to catch non-status people. The other two big issues that we found ourselves having to grapple with were one of gentrification. It's along the line of the kind of next frontier of development of Beirut with high-rises, mainly office buildings, and condominiums. Again, just across the street from us on the other side, there's a gigantic building that I assume is going to be an office building. And the other issue was that of agriculture. The area is historically, although you couldn't tell now, but it is historically an agricultural area where mainly, I guess, citrus, variants of citrus, lemon, orange, etc., was being grown. There are still a few farmers that own land here. I'm not going to get into the specifics of their conditions, but it is something that we have been thinking about and working with through the program. So, as I said, from the jump, our idea was to open the doors of this institution. So to think about the institution not as a platform for, not just as a platform for producing things of cultural value, but to really think of it as infrastructure, both in terms of the kind of skill sets that it is reliant on, but also much more simply walls, a ceiling, a roof, a building, etc. To really start from these kind of very concrete elements to see what can be done in this space. And I guess I'll just bring up this idea of generosity here, because there's a few of these terms that we were thinking about from the get-go, and none of them quite sit well. So I guess we'll get to discussing this. The issue for me with generosity already implies that there is a kind of a stable source of resources and a stable audience or receptor that sees the value in these resources and that it needs them and that is receptive to them. Similarly, as when we were thinking about the porosity, let's say, of the institution, or this idea of opening doors, realizing that opening doors is not enough for necessarily the neighbors to want to come in. So to think about generosity or inclusiveness or porosity or openness as all problematic terms, all necessary terms, maybe in combination with one another, but none of them are the key to kind of addressing these issues. But at the very least, what this enabled us to do is from the get-go to think about art not as something that is of value de facto, but as a vehicle that can enact various social relations. And those social relations might be monetary in, let's say, repainting walls clean between exhibitions, or building walls, or working with carpenters to build benches or plinths, etc. To really try and think about all of these aspects not as separate from what ends up being exhibited, that these are part and parcel of what an institution does, and part and parcel of what need to be activated. And this idea of opening doors was anyway imposed on us, in a sense, by various events. The kind of most violent of which was the explosion, which maybe symbolically, we had a kind of doorway that was designed by a local architect, and we had to do away with that structure and instead just rely on our metal gates, whether they're wide open or just shut. There was no secondary entrance that marked that you are now entering a kind of different space, a space different from the one you just walked in from. Another thing that I think forced us to think about opening doors was also the uprising, that the space had to be open to practices that were already happening, regardless of what cultural institutions were trying to dictate. I mean, essentially, cultural institutions were in a space, and continue to be in a space, of trying to catch up to what was already organically happening on the street in the kind of expanded sense. And so the first thing that we did after the explosion, once we repaired the space, we repaired our gate and put a lock on it. We had some walls that had crumbled. We built those back up so that we could have a safe and secured space. And we offered the space to different groups that were doing work, aid work, people who were distributing food, people who were replacing windows and cutting glass in the space, people who were offering furniture for people who lost most of their belongings, and so forth. And then there were things that closed the space, that forced us to close our doors. Mainly I'm thinking about Corona, but also the financial crisis. And so, like many institutions worldwide, we had to think about doing stuff because we had to stay active, and the vehicle that was accessible to us was online. Many of the things that we were seeing very quickly, the art world responding with, in terms of virtual exhibitions and so forth, we didn't find necessarily exciting or suitable for the local context. Yet by the time we, in the meanwhile, as we figured out kind of ideal tools, we used the tools that were at our disposal, so our social media platforms, mainly Instagram, And in conjunction with thinking about the financial crisis and an exodus that was already happening, mainly artists just leaving, and also more abstract factors, maybe not quantifiable factors like a lack of concentration, a lack of focus, a lack of inspiration, people not being able to jump into big ideas or to exchange with us over big ideas. So we launched this thing called the micro commissions, which we were doing monthly or every other month or whenever we were able to, get our act together. And throughout the course of each month, we would launch a theme, invite 4 artists to have a small fee to do a small commission, a micro commission that we launched on a weekly basis. So I'll go through these quite quickly. These are the 4 themes that we have so far. There's a 5th one that we're working on currently. And this was a way to engage with people that at a time where we weren't able to come together physically, which followed a time where we were together all the time physically. Another thing that we launched was a kind of rethinking of a project that we had intended on doing from the beginning, which was a collective publication, again with these very small words, these root words in Arabic, so the 3-letter root words of Arabic, hoping that these very small keys would be a way to unfold much more complex issues. So each issue of the derivative, we would invite 3 guest curators who in turn would invite 5 writers to unfold these 3 letters. 5 writers and an artist to have an artistic intervention accompanying each of the texts. These were ways in which we were thinking of, even in the smallest sense, creating community, in that it was a way for us to think with people, even when we're not able to be with them. So when we were able to reopen the space, there were things that the space is made to do, which is to say, to have exhibitions. So I'll go through these quickly, not because they're not interesting to me, but because that's not the topic that we're discussing. But the first exhibition we did was like a collection of everything that we had been doing online over the past months, alongside an exhibition for an artist in residence, which we've done 2 of so far, 2 artists in residence. This is the show by Ramallah-based Palestinian artist Shuru Harib, which we just closed. This is Shakib Abu Hamdan. Again, this was in the second space, which we also just closed, and this was the exhibition of the second artist in residence, a collective of filmmakers, Camellia Committee. What we've also been doing is hosting. So again, rethinking about the things that are already there, seats, projectors, walls, sometimes air conditioning, sometimes electricity and so forth. So we gave the space, or we lent the space to people who are, doing things like Irtijal, Metropolis for their film screenings, Legal Agenda for a series of talks and interventions that they were doing around the case of the August 4th explosion. I'll just talk about 3 longer-term ongoing projects that we are working on. One is on the rooftop of the building, which is not accessible directly from our space, but it's on top of the building, 1,700 square meters rooftop, which we are trying to turn into a community garden. I'll talk maybe later in the conversation about how we try to create the collective to get this off the ground. Initially, we started with a large group. The large group fell apart. Then we had a smaller group. Then COVID happened, and that fell apart. Then we have been working with a group called Siyak, as well as Buzurna Juzurna, to design it and to compile the community that's going to be taking care of this garden. And then we have 2 projects that I think of as in parallel. One is an elaborate series of workshops around exhibition making. So all of the technical aspects of making an exhibition, from lighting to hanging works, but also registry, insurance, the works, because we felt that there's a lack of that skill set here. At the same time, we feel that there are people who do that work very well here, but they just do it in a particular way that is responsive to the context here. So the idea was, because we also think that we're more isolated than we have been since I can remember at least, so to bring people who function in these international institutions on a kind of a certain professional level, but then also combining that with people who are doing things here to come up with a third way of doing things that can combine this. So that is responsive to the context here, but that can also be applied internationally if need be. So thinking about employability and creating a skill set locally. And the idea or the hope is that that then also expands to the people that we work with. So the example, which is an unrealistic example, but the example that I have in mind to kind of illustrate the ways in which we're trying to think about this is, let's say a projector, which is now projecting this image, to replace a bulb for such a projector could cost up to $300 or $400 today. So if we work with an electrician that's very good at his or her job here to come up with a prototype that can be a locally made replacement. So this kind of thinking. Alongside that, we have an online project that's in the works very slowly called Work, 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 which is to try and compile a database of workers and all of these skill sets that are directly related to exhibition making, but also in a more expanded sense. So again, an electrician is not necessarily only doing exhibition work, but to compile a kind of a resource where people who are trying to get things done can access this resource, and the resource is put together by people who have worked with certain individuals and recommend them. So it's sort of a yellow page. It's a resource for people who need these services, but it's also hopefully a way for these individuals to also advertise their services and to increase employability in some way. This is the rooftop. And these are some of the samples that we've been trying to put together with the different people that we're working with. I'll stop here.
بلش طيب. Founder.
And she will tell us more about, I think you wanted to respond to this term generosity laws in relation to the practice of payment for artists.
So I originally wanted to do a presentation and then died till the time away from me, and somehow I lost myself. But I did jot down all the notes that I wanted to make sure I said. Part of them is about generosity. But I also, after you said that, kind of gave me an interesting reflection on it, because we always say the labor of love when it comes to artists. Coming from marginalized communities come in, we have an extra labor that we have to give not just to our community, but to ourselves in order to feel, a certain sense of belonging. So there's an extensive amount of labor. And the labor of love is a way to say that, yeah, you'll do it for free because you love what you do. And I get that now, because now we're going to say that there's there's this endless well of resource that I can give you from. But I also stand by the concept of generosity in what you said as a definition. Stepping away from capitalistic tropes, understanding how if you want to repeat the definition.
Okay, so the definition was like, it's the willingness to give, so it's forced us to recognize that knowledge is diverse, cannot be owned or claimed, and its practice is in stark opposition to competition, rivalry, and rarity. All that are capitalist values that have come to define contemporary life.
in that exact definition, the word competition is always striking. It's striking in everything we do, because we also compete for airtime, we compete for social media swipes, we compete for everything nowadays. And that's how capitalism has somewhat, not just, I don't want to say it's seeped, it is in everything that we are, but it's something that has become so layered that even the concept of breaking from it in of itself seems like a hypocritical kind of thing when we say we're anti-capitalist, but we're still on Instagram, I still have an iPhone, and I'm still opening a Mac, but I'm there's still some things there that we haven't fully been able to grasp or deconstruct, and I don't think we can when we always have to give ourselves, like, again, the binary, you know, either we are or we aren't. But I do believe that the word competition is really the key word. It's collaboration and not competition. And I think that's what breaks it and makes it generosity, right? At least in my...
Yeah, I think even if we want to talk about like generosity in opposition to competition, because we always say like the opposition of competition, the opposite of competition is collaboration. But also I don't like this thing of forcing, you know, like sometimes we have to force collaboration or force the spirit of collectivity. But when we think about it rather as like generosity, which is like if somebody comes to me, I have something and I have something to give and time and resource, you know, rather than no, this is for me, or no, I shouldn't share because an opportunity will go away from me or something like this. I don't know.
In that case, then I agree. I mean, at least Haven has always been a very strong belief in community-based. We have to be a reflection of what the community needs. We have to be a reflection that fulfills the community needs. And we also have to be a reflection of the principles and values of the community we aim to serve. So you can't go on and let's say, apply for particular donors that do not or are not aligned with your principles and your values as a community. So, masalan, you cannot be an LGBTQI organization with somebody that is pro-ON and pro-FMP and pro-those on your board because they have literally publicly stated they are anti. So just to give you like a basic kind of... So you just can't have those kind of things coexist and expect it to continue to grow. And I think that's the bare thing that we have with capitalism, is that it gives us that concept of growth, and therefore we have to sustain it, and it's this endless cycle until the bubble pops and the organization falls. And the whole premise is, then you are serving, or you're responding, or you're reflecting, or your aim is to fulfill a proposal that is read by the other person on that other end who never knows you, who never knows your context, who never knows your humanity, who doesn't know your community, and as sure as heck doesn't understand why you really need that money. You know, so we end up having to adjust and remold and restructure ourselves to befit the funding structures and the donors and their outlines. And I think the strength of any good community-based organization or community-based institute or whatever it is to speak to its community rather than its donors. So we can see that a lot on NGO Instagrams and stuff like that. There's a lot of conversations with the donors. Like, we reach this many people. Most people in the community don't care. If you didn't reach me, I don't care who else you reach. I care that you reach me. I'm the community. So changing that kind of perspective also. Who are you talking to? Not just who are you serving, who are you talking to? What is your platform for? What are your intentions? And then quite frankly, what are your values and principles that have shaped all of these projects and ideas and hopes that you have set as an institution, you know, whether it be your mission or your vision and so on. To give you a little bit of a background on Haven, and I opened it just because I have the worst memory since August 4th. I think it's just our coping mechanisms. All of us have slowly started forgetting our own names. So Haven originally was founded in 2011, but we weren't legally registered until 2017 because I was so stubborn-headed that I refused to remove the word queer from our mission. I had to at some point to register, to be able to function, to open a cultural space and all of that. But we worked for 6 years with no support, neither legally or otherwise. And how we started originally is that we were a group of artists and activists who really wanted a space to be together and to perform together, and to have a shared platform that wasn't about us competing with one another. Because at that point, there was either we're exhibiting as artists and like we're khalas full committed, but at that time when Haven was founded, I was 21. And why I say it's from the community is because it was a group of artists and activists who were like, we really need this. And we came together and we made it. We built it in our own way, and we slowly remolded as the community grew, when the community needed visual arts to be involved, because suddenly there was 500 visual artists and I didn't know where to go with them. I had to bring in the visual aspect, and then they ran that, and I just handled the poetry section because that was my strength. And then Yasmin Rifai comes in with a different aspect that she's handling, and that's when we opened the community centers. And I think we always overlook it in Haven that the moment an interior architect set foot in the Haven team, we opened 2 centers. We're always like, I don't know how we open the centers. I don't know why we saw the need. And her constant thing was, it doesn't matter what you offer a community if the place that you also offer it isn't somewhere they can go. So it's not just about being, there, we do, because at that point we only did pop-up events. And it was wonderful for that one day of relief, for all of these artists and activists to come together and to exhibit and to work and to exchange their tools and skills, and suddenly you're a musician and you just teamed up with a filmmaker and tomorrow you're doing the score for their film. And that was enough for me, at least, because I was still very wrapped up in just art, like I wanted to produce constantly. And that's why it was important to have a community of artists that were producing around me, because they just pushed me and motivated me and challenged me. And suddenly it stopped being a pop-up thing, because it made no sense that we were only coming together for one day out of the month, because we wouldn't leave each other. So then we did a festival, and then from the festival came the first Haven House, because when we spent 3 nights together on the beach, producing nothing but art and listening to nothing but music, we were 128 participating artists for 3 days, not including the attendees, just the artists. I had to kick everyone out at one point. Like the festival ended, the guys like, you guys need to فكفكوا فلوا على البيت بقى, people just stayed. And then by the end of it, they actually stayed, as in people made a deal with the landowner and started fixing the land and just stayed there, which I think was one of the most beautiful things. So we opened the first space, and then in 2016, and the Haven registration was finally done in 2017. We actually were building the house, and we were covered in sawdust when the lawyer walked in with the papers to sign. And we signed, and we continued our work because we did not understand those papers and why they were necessary for us to do what we were doing, because we were doing it. We were artists coming together, producing exhibitions and shows for free, mainly because we were broke. But the premise of why it was free is because we looked at each other and said, well, if I can't afford to pay it, how do I expect you to pay it? And the whole premise was, how do we take away this concept? Because at that point, Kaman, there was a lot of, for poets, like upcoming poets and musicians and stuff like that, you had to go work in a bar. It was always performing in a bar. It was you getting your $50 a night charge, and the bar making endless amounts of income as far as the band charges that they take and the money they make from the bar, and you as an artist who's worked all week and is forced to do covers because it's the only way they'd hire you anyway. So you have to do that for $50, and it started feeling, as artists going to support our friends, like we were being extorted, and then we were extorting our friends by being there, by saying, yeah, we're gonna be that person that pays that band charge for my friend to be extorted. And then that's how the idea came to start performing together. And the visual artists came with Yukunkun, and then the community centers. And the community centers were just, in of themselves, the melting pot. I mean, it's impossible to have a community center where it's open to the public, where people can pay $2 and have unlimited coffee, unlimited Wi-Fi and water, and just stay there indefinitely, and not have people come up with projects, and not have people be invested in one another's work, and be very much motivated to ensure the space sustains, because it's their space. It's where they're hanging out every single day. It's the only way they have their little workroom, because otherwise they wouldn't have had access or whatever it was. So they started building it together, and we moved on to the second space because we got to a point where I think Yasmin, the creative director, walked into Haven and she said, Dayna, I think you should know that there are 7 artists sleeping on our couches. We walked inside, we knew 2 of them. And that's when we're like, okay, maybe we need a bigger space, and we need to make sure that people still can maintain privacy while they're in the space. So like there's some kind of division. So we went out and we found another heritage building, and this was another thing of, I think, also Yasmin's little knobs that none of us noticed. Yasmin always said, we rent the tiles and we build the walls. We rent the garden and we build the home. The whole premise is, what is the community missing? What is the heritage that we want to hold on to? What are the things that we can fix that are already present and that we can build on and ensure the community finds itself in its own culture and its own heritage? Because being LGBTQI or being, marginalized community, especially women and queer, there was a very, very omnipresent kind of fear, right? Like, where are you really safe? Where is really yours? What is the concept of being out in the open, being a woman with not being harassed, being queer woman and not being, discriminated against or attacked? And that was always how we chose our locations. So when we were really desperate to hold hands with our partners or with our friends in the sunlight, we knew we had to find a garden. And when we knew that we needed 5, 6 rooms because there were so many artists coming in at any given time, we knew we had to get 2 floors. And that is the premise of what we build around. It was never, well, we have this, so let's, everybody come on over. And it was more like, okay, what do you need? And let's build that accordingly. So the second space had a shelter, which 2 rooms were dedicated to LGBTQI individuals and artists escaping persecution from all over MENA. 2 other rooms were set for international artists coming in to do residencies in Beirut. And the downstairs had a gallery room, a cafe, a concept store, a workspace, and a garden. The gallery was free for local artists every month, and every 3 months we'd exhibit the internationals in the residency, depending on how many people were active to produce as an exhibition, or if they were doing research, or if they were just here to, build on a project. And after the Thawra happened, the revolution, it was pretty obvious for Haven that we had to go on strike, because we felt that if we continued to do meetings and talks as far as our projects were concerned, it was kind of as if we were as if we were in denial of what was happening outside. There's a revolution. I'm not hosting any talk. I'm not hosting anything. I'm telling people go. So being that Haven was in Maram Khail, we also gave it to activists to start doing meetings. We also had debates, a lot of debates. At one point they started saying Haven as they were running away from tear gas, just because the garden was open, so that they could just hide out there until the Darak and all of them had cleared out from Mishmaiz and Maram Khail, so that we could disseminate again. We used to have a lot of meetings there, and then the financial crisis, and we moved to our offices. We lasted in our offices for 2 weeks before the August 4th blast, and the second day we had turned it into a shelter space. We housed 6 LGBTQI individuals and 2 migrant women, all of which we gave new homes, and the migrant women we were able to repatriate to Ghana. And then, of course, we did distributions. We were able to collect $100,000 from artists and activists internationally and distribute it in dollars to, I can give you the numbers, but I think it's absurd, to a lot of people. We were actually able to distribute to 201 single mothers, 195 LGBT individuals, 22 migrant workers. We also were able to fund 35 artists with their projects and their equipment. We paid over 1,304 months of rent to cover different people, so in total it was a lot of rent paid. Among with other things that we were just doing as activists individually. So the whole premise of Haven always has never been, well, نحن جمعية for the arts, so what are you doing? It was never about that. It was, what did the community need right now? The blast happened, we're opening a shelter, we're opening support, we're distributing food, we're distributing aid. The moment that calmed down a little bit, Haven got together with a bunch of other LGBTQI organizations. We created something called the Yalla Care Coalition, which now we are working on. First, we work in referrals now, so we can support each other constantly. So if somebody needs help and goes to, let's say, MERSA for sexual health, they're automatically referred to SIDC for social services. So it's about making sure that organizations are connected so that the person in need doesn't knock on 500 doors. It's the NGO's job to do all that. The person should just come and say, this is my situation, and then the NGO goes, all right, we'll outreach, we'll make sure you get everything, and then you'll come pick it up from one spot. So that's what we're working on now. We created that, and we have done the massive assessments. We're also releasing reports. I mean, this is why I think it's very weird, because Haven can go from a residency in a cultural center, and then when the blast happened, we were distributing aid, and now we're doing assessments and making sure that there's a referral system. Those are all things that we have to do because we are part of the community. And that's why I think it's also extremely important to always feed into that. So your principles are fed from the community. The community's needs are literally what your mission is. That's it. So the remolding of an institute was always our automatic go-to. What does the community need? What does the community want us to be and reflect and support and offer now? And that's what we have to do. For the future, we are now in the process of opening our 3rd community center, which is the dream at this point, because it's a massive garden in Ashrafiyeh, and it's going to be open to the public again. Our opening show will have the drag queens returning with the visual arts, and basically just returning some life to the city and to the people that have lost the most, especially women and marginalized communities really have lost so many safe spaces. It's absurd. There's nowhere for us to go unless we're going to a bar. And I want something else in between. I feel like there needs to be an in-between there. So we're opening a community center to do events and activities again. Everything will be free. Everything is completely given to the public. The space will be free entrance. Everything will be free in support of the community there. Our second project, these are the projects for the next 2 years. So the first year of the community center is going to be completely dedicated to activities, giving a breath of fresh air again to the community, bringing us all back together, seeing how do we still fit, who's still left. because I feel like that's a massive question that all of us are dreading. I have never in my life received like a job opening and then me go, I don't know who to send this to. I don't know who's still here to take this job or who even wants this job. So I would end up sending it and I would at least get 3 or 4 messages of, oh, I would love to, but I'm leaving, or oh, I'm جهز ورائي, أو لا ما بدي. So it's starting to get a little sad. So part of the second year of the community center is to create the repatriating queer and women artists one exhibition at a time. So we will bring back every single woman and queer artist that leaves this country to come back and exhibit here again, because we've seen too many of us leave because we have no choice. And it was never about, and I hate people who bully us, like that say, like, oh, you have to stay. We want to stay, but we've got to give each other reasons to. And I think that that's what we all do, you know, by collaborating, by working together, by creating new avenues of understanding of what an institute does or what the community needs, is to constantly give each other reason to either stick around or to come back and to not lose that connection and bridge. So that's the second year, to repatriate all the artists. A second project that we're doing in parallel with the community center is the book, which is queer art from the MENA region in the last 20 years. It's not going to be an archive. Nadim and all of them have made it quite clear that they hate that word. So we're going to stick clear of archive, but we're working right now on trying to understand, because as you do research, so many questions pop up that you realize that you didn't really evaluate in the beginning, or how do you divide, what is the book, or is it a chapter, or is it, you know? So we're going to spend the next 2.5 years working on this regionally. We're going to ask 5 curators from all over the region, and of course input from Beirut Art Center and all the colleagues locally, to put in input of artists and everything. We're also doing interviews with all of them, so the book hopefully will be the first of its kind, because there has never been a book to show and represent the queer art that's happening in this region, and to stop this kind of constant berating of, well, this is a Western concept, because it's not, as I'm sure we all know, and that it also, and to me at least, of why I think it's important that we bring artists back, is also to give them a sense of, this is your home, and that no matter how much you're forced out of it, or that you might feel that you must leave, there is a bridge there that's always built for you to build on. So those are the 2 upcoming projects so far.
Great, amazing. Okay, so I think we're, as usual, a bit, we're a bit late, but it's okay. So now we'll have Adele, who will tell us about her own practice in, like, I think, yeah. Hi, Adele. You're with
Hello.
us? Okay.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we can't hear you yet. Try again. Sorry.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So I think you heard the 2 presentation, and so before we start with the questions, maybe you want to introduce us to, I don't know, your reflection on what a generous institution can be, and your latest exhibition, I think, at the Khalil Sakakini Center in Ramallah. Okay, so we will let you speak.
But can you please share my slide? Experience at the Khalil Sakakini Cultural Center as a guest curator. But please, if can you mute the laptop, because I am hearing myself.
I think it's good, you can start. I think she has echo, that's why she was told to mute. But can you start now or try?
Okay. So I was a guest curator for Khalil Sakakini Cultural Center for 6 months. And I tried to build a visual arts program that is related to the values and the mission to the center itself. So, here why it was titled the institution as a praxis, the curator as an advocate. I was trying to think how we can make or build a visual arts program that is inherently a praxis of the mission of the center. The center is a medium center that has been working as a community center and a cultural center. It is self-defined as a progressive, critical, and alternative, and it's trying to create a pluralistic and critical emancipatory culture. The values that the center is encouraging are horizontality and the alternative modes of production, opposing to capitalism. And it also focuses a lot on working with the community and collect, and it centers land in its programs. So the big words that were popping from this mission and vision are what is bottom up and how can we be active with the community, and what is the difference between cultural democracy and cultural democratization? What is the role of tools in cultural dissemination and cultural consumption, if I can use this word? And how can we really have a wider public participation in the arts, because this is a huge problem here in Palestine specifically, because after the Oslo Accords in 1993 there was like a forced um, a process of the NGOization of the community, and also presenting in new forms of contemporary art that maybe locally it wasn't like the suitable time to deal with such art forms. Also, the connotation of filling the gaps, which relies the role of a community center or a medium-sized center. Medium-sized centers produce, what can medium-sized centers present to its community, and what is the difference between medium-sized cultural center and a bigger institution? So I was thinking that if there is no large participation or wide participation of the community in the arts, this is also because the community itself lacks the habitus or lacks the knowledge on the arts that make you um, can maybe feel that this art is relevant to you, or that make you maybe wants to be an art goer or wants to visit an exhibition. Because if you don't have this knowledge or this education, the exhibitions will always be inaccessible to you. And for me, this is where the problematic meaning of accessibility. You can just say the doors of our institutions are always open to everyone. If the design itself of the institution is not that inviting, if the concepts that you are presenting are not familiar with many people, so accessibility is not always something physical. It's also in the power structure, the injustice structures that are already built in the community, and education is one of them. So the center presented a series of lectures that are like introductories to arts. So the first one was what is Palestinian art, and presented by Slim Mansur, and more than 100 people registered at the first series. So yes, there is a lack of the basic knowledge in the arts. The second one was on Islamic art by Vera Tamari. The third one was intended to be on contemporary art, but we couldn't do it because of the political situation. And also, while doing these series, we tried like not to be patronizing the white public who are attending this. So a lot of their questions and remarks were taken in consideration and reflected upon after the services. Also, you can see an open call for um, a writing workshop. We tried to also invite more people and give them the chance to learn more about art criticism, which is also another field that is lacking here locally in Palestine. And four writers joined this workshop by Yazan Ashkar. Here you can see an open access Google doc that we used for the series What is Palestinian Art? Uh, the, um, the audience who participated has many questions and remarks on the art history that was presented by Sleiman Mansour, and everyone knows who is Sleiman Mansour. So there was an attempt to include multi perspectives on what is art history and who did what is art history and why. So one of the many questions that was asked that why Sleiman started his series by talking about the painting, like he start it's like the historization of the Palestinian art history started with the painting, which is the European يعني, medium of art. And why didn't he talked about embroidery and basket making and think that a working class person or a woman would, and that is part of traditional art. Sorry, it's I don't know if you can see this slide, but this is a slide from another lecture that for we invited Omar Nasser Youssef, who is a fashion designer and a critical writer. In this lecture, he talked to the audience on the official history of art and why embroidery and basket weaving and jewelry work are not part of it. And he raised the discussion. So we tried to be receptive and responsive for the questions of the audience. Um, then here we can see the exhibition. But these forms need to be created. In this exhibition, also as a curator, I tried to talk about a subject that is inherently related to the values of the center, which are horizontality, openness, being politically active, and having relationships with the community or community. So the notion of self-organization was a subject that's really in alignment with the values and the mission of the center. It is also tackling and talking about different modes of reproduction that are in many ways opposing to the capitalist mode of production. And also, this notion of self-organization can be found in the community in many ways, and for example, in agricultural cooperatives and many other forms of organization. So I was trying like to make discussion about this subject that is relevant to many people and not only the regular art goers. And there were 18 participating artists, collectives, and spaces from all over the world. A third of them were local and Palestinians, other third are Arab artists, and the last was international. So I would like to talk about a little bit about the process of making this exhibition, and how I tried also to include the values themselves in the process of choosing the artist, of dictating the production fees, and so on. So, for example, about 85% of the budget was for the artist and the art production. Um, Also, there was a balance between choosing established and emergent artists. 6 out of 7 of the Palestinian artists were emergent artists, and all of them haven't shown before in an official gallery space. Um, Also, يعني, this means that I have to dedicate more time. Also, means that the the organization or the center is trying to be generous in the opportunities it gives to emergent artists. Um, Also, some of the production fees supported other things rather than producing the artwork itself. For example, we covered the rental expenses of some artists, and we covered accessibility to knowledge and education for others. For example, we commissioned a philosophy academic to help an emergent art collective to uh, to 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 read and to learn more about a chapter from Deleuze's book. Uh, we also try to compensate labor outside material artwork, for example, compensating guest editors and writers who were a a direct part of artworks. Also, in the deadline itself, we try to put a reasonable deadline that can help as many people as possible to apply. Uh, the exhibition also has an open call rather than commissioning the regular people in the arts that we know working this notion, so we can include as much as emergent and new artists as we can. In this screenshot also you can see an open access reading list that was included in the open call itself. So people also can have a sufficient time working on the open call so we can make sure more people are applying. These are some photos from the exhibition. This is Sada movement collective work. This work is from Lebanon by Sherbil El Khouri and Monica Basbous. This is from the opening. The opening included many people and from wide backgrounds and different ages. This is the work of Inji Mohsen, Sukaina Jawal, Moon Studio, and Muhammad Abdel Karim, which is about different words in the arts that is related to collaboration and group work and the different Arabic translations for them. This is the work of Mu'tasam Siam from Jerusalem. Ready-made object and a group of photographs. So being invited to this event make me like thinking a little back to evaluate يعني, this process. So and also asking to Mary Noor, I was thinking about the balance between the curatorial and institutional. Like in this process, the guest curator or the consultant uh, is and including everyone who's working in a medium-sized art institution, which are usually um, always like working on the scarcity, let's say, and the role of an advocate means that you have to wear so many hats, which means that you will be drained يعني, at the end of this production. I also was thinking that how this attitude, it depends on the individual and the funders, and it is not sustainable. And maybe if had make some change, let's say, in how we see things or how we can produce art or how can we collaborate, but is also it's like draws some question on the long term and the accumulation. يعني, is this the long term that we want, a continuous distress and negation, or should we like maybe think of a total alternative outside the organizations? And thank you so much. I think you tapped a bit about it, but I was wondering particularly about the decision-making processes and mechanisms in institutions. What do you think about them and how those particular processes can be opened up? So not like pushing furthermore, instead of just engaging and working with the community and the artists, actually making them stakeholders and part of the decision-making process. So this is open for the three of you. What do you think about it? And yeah, whether you've worked on this. So thank you.
Who wants to answer first?
It's a great question because we can't think of an institute without its policies and its procedures and how particular situations are handled if anything were to arise or so on and so forth, and what are the things that the institution or whatever entity it is trying to protect. Is it protecting its people, its artists, its creatives who it's trying to serve, or is it trying to protect itself and make sure it's longevitous and sustainable and all of that? To tone it first, to give you a little bit of where we come from is the policy of resistance. So I mean, we take a page out of the Book of Palestine. I mean, we resist on all forms, and part of an institute's job is to also resist the situation within the same context. So Lebanon, مثلا, for say, we have 534, which makes LGBTQI illegal. We have a lot of laws that take away women's rights, that directly take away rights, not just don't exist to protect rights. So part of the policies of Haven is noting all of the things that do not exist in the law. So part of it, مثلا, we don't say maternal leave, we don't say paternal leave, we say parental leave, and we also have adoption leave, because we also understand there are LGBT individuals that might want to adopt and also leave. And part of that is to make sure the wording that's there makes people understand that you are supportive of any of their positions or their principles. As far as the decision-making process, we believe in, we don't have a whole one person's decision is what goes. We don't believe in that. We sit around the table. I usually end up just agreeing because they are the community, and my job and the creative director's job is to sit around this table and say, okay, these are everybody's ideas. These are the things that we want to do. How can we bring it forward? It's never about my decision or the other CD's decision or any of that. We also are a 100% women-led organization. Our advisory board is women, our legal board is women, our executive team is women, our entire team and staff are women. So we also believe in not theme-based. So we don't do themed, we don't do مثلا queer themes, we do queer-led. We don't do women themes, we do women-led. So if it's not something that I know, I step aside. And that's why I was saying earlier that when the creative director of Haven, jumped in and it was an interior architect, it was understood that now we were ready to take on a space. Prior to that, I'm a performance artist, so I was, very capable of putting on stages and events. And it's always, what is the input and how does the community build from that? So as long as making sure that it's not a hierarchy, because you want to break that pyramid, because that's the whole concept I think that she was also referring to, which is like, what is the concept of bottom up? How do we even get there when anyway the money is still coming from somewhere to somewhere else, and that still needs to be distributed. So we have, particular to our policies, we have salary scalings. So we can't, there is no, the director gets $10,000 or the rest are getting $100 بالشهر. It's not how it works. So there's a set scale between each single salary. Part of our policies is not one person gets a bonus, either everyone gets a bonus or no one gets a bonus. If you're working overtime, that is automatic to your salary. Other than the basic policies that need to be in place to protect your staff and make sure that they're not burnt out, that they have mental health, and part of our policies is that it's the job of the institute to make sure that the staff takes mental health days, because if they've dwindled all their annual leave but they're working overtime, then it's your responsibility to make sure if they've done 2 overtimes but have used up all their annual leaves and cannot take, it is part of our policies to automatically give them 2 free paid mental health days to make sure they can rejuvenate and stand on their feet. Once a month, any person that menstruates within Haven, within our policies, they have menstruation flexibility, مثلا. They can take a day off if they don't want to come with work because then they're in pain, and they have the right to 2 extra days on top of the day off to work remote, because we also understand that there is that step of getting out of the house and going when you're sick, when you could just do the work from bed and you're comfortable. So we believe in the policies themselves being a reflection of the resistance that you are trying to create in the world. They have to be a reflection of that. And the Institute is a reflection of the principles and values of the community. So when you set the values and principles first, everything else is building into that, rather than the other way around, where it's trying to feed into a mission or a number or an output.
Did you mean internally strictly, or did you mean in terms of the project? I mean, I don't think I have any good answers. I have, yeah. I mean, I have some thoughts that I think kind of lead to something. I have some thoughts that probably don't, and then I have probably some controversial things to say that are not, maybe, but maybe we can talk about them. The one thought that leads somewhere, hopefully, is in terms of internal structure. I mean, one of the things that we talk about is, in the same way as the hope is with the exhibitions and working with younger artists, that the Beirut Art Center hopefully still has the ability to be a platform in the kind of path of a young artist to bigger, better things. The hope is that in terms of an employment opportunity, that it functions in a similar way. So, you know, there's only 5 people that work in the center, but the idea is that, you know, while we all have sort of job descriptions, that ultimately what takes over is the skill sets and also the desires of each person, and everything happens in conversation. I'm not going to pretend like there's no hierarchy, it's structured that way. I think in daily practice, hopefully we work against that, but it's not something that we're actively kind of stripping away. That's just the honest truth. Here's a maybe controversial thing, but I think it's true, or at least it's true in my experience. The projects now, talking about engagement or community engagement and so forth, and granted maybe we also don't have the experience in this, because that's not really the history of the BAC, it's something that we're trying to bring the institution towards. But the attempts of purely horizontal sort of structures that we've tried, and there's been a few, 2 or 3. There's always been a kind of pushback on asking for more clarity or giving more structure or defining more things before bringing other people in. The times where we say, like, come and let's think together, this is the space that we have and this is what we want to do. Yeah, again, I think there's been several times a request to give more instruction, basically. And so, again, maybe it's the nature of the organization, maybe it's where we picked it up from. I mean, it's very different from what Dayna's describing in terms of building something from the ground up, or even what Adele is talking about. That's not the situation of the BAC, and it's not our situation within the BAC. So, yeah.
And Adele, do you want to talk more? I mean, I've seen from your presentation that you have even a set of tools like preferring open calls to commission. I think these are important. I mean, for me, like concretely, you were showing things. Like, I don't know, but I'll let you answer.
Thank you. I am an independent worker, so maybe I can talk about my experience, but I can. I don't know if I heard her answer, her question correctly, but she was asking about decision making inside institutions, right?
That was the question.
Okay, so I can tell you a bit about the decision-making process maybe in Khalil Sakakini Cultural Center that I was acquainted with. They are working with something that is it's like health. It was like inspired by the landscape of Palestine, that different hills with different heights. So there is no a very steep hierarchy between different team members, but sometimes you are a little bit higher than someone else on another hill. Um, Only in some fields. For example, if my experience is in filmmaking, so I am the one who has a higher hierarchy on making decisions with film programs and so on and so on. So maybe this is an interesting form that is it's not totally horizontal, but it's not totally steep and hierarchical.
Yeah, that was a bit what Dayna was asking about, like, this is where I have the knowledge, so I'll be in charge, and if I don't, then I'll step aside. So I think it's one of the things. Yeah, sometimes it works organically, but if you have really like solid group, I guess. Who else has a question? No question? Yes, one.
Are these spaces open to the public, and how can we access them if we're remotely? Like, for example, I don't live in Lebanon, I live in Canada. So how would I be able to either be featured or collaborate with these spaces?
Okay, so it's more about like the larger community that's, I guess, is abroad, or accessibility for no larger community. I don't know if any of you has thought of it. I mean, I think Adele, with the exhibition, you did an open call and you tried to have like 1/3, and it's online. Like part of it is online, no, from what I understood.
No.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Beirut Art Center, it's online, a lot of things.
Yeah. Again, I think somewhat maybe controversially, I think there's, in terms of the direction of the center, there are certain practices and voices that I'm interested in, or we're interested in, my colleague Ahmad is interested in, and this is even before we came to the center, that we wanted to try and bring certain voices that don't normally appear in the center to the center. And so we haven't done any open calls, for example. We're still very slowly trying to work towards doing this, bringing a set of practices that have not been featured in a space like the Beirut Art Center, and to try and see if there's a way in which the space can accommodate for these practices, and also in a way that is a kind of a mutual enrichment, so that the nature of the space itself is also changing. It's not like the space is accommodating, and this is again going back to the idea of generosity. Yeah, that there's this kind of exchange. So yeah, it's not an open access in this way.
You can join the community center when it opens, hopefully. And also you can just, hopefully we'll be launching the website at the end of the month, and the whole premise of that is that if artists want to be connected to other artists, or if they just want to link up, like you use the perfect wording, which is like the yellow book, of just like a network of artists that want to work together. If you're in Canada and want to collaborate with locals here, how could you do that? Who do you reach out to? Kind of like a chat box, very AOL kind of moment of seeing how we can connect artists to each other and what they can do from that. And then hopefully the book, and after the community center opens, there's repatriating artists back, right? So hopefully we'll bring you back to exhibit here.
If someone has a question, I don't know, because you now, Dayna, you also mentioned like there will be like a repository, is it? Yeah, of like artists, right? And you were mentioning something about that Haig, like for technicians and like people working in the arts. And I know Adele also you have one for also mainly cultural worker based in Palestine as a way to bridge like across, because like Palestine is a very scattered territory. Yeah. So
And in diaspora.
sorry, we didn't hear. For the diaspora. So yeah, I think, I don't know, I found something in common you didn't know. Which do you think it's because of this isolation or because we're becoming very diasporic?
I think there's a certain sense of decentralization, and at the same time, taking away the whole structure of who's known will continue to be known and who isn't will continue to be in the shadows kind of situation. And understanding that definitely with art practitioners and technicians in particular, I feel like there's a certain kind of, if you don't know the technician, you're not going to find a technician kind of situation. Especially in Beirut, I feel like you have to know your you have to know your friends, you have to know the people, you have to know the technician, you have to know the space. There has to be some kind of network there, and I think that's why all of us would be going towards that of creating networks and understanding that the web is like intersectional and interconnected.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about, I guess the word that's missing here, like somehow, maybe instead of generosity also is politics, that it's a building of politics, and that politics is not simply a discursive one or an a priori one, and it's not just about kind of rendering things accessible, kind of de facto. It's about through practice, hopefully, determining certain set of values, and those values are enacted in labor. They're enacted in coming together, and so I think it's about, in some way, it's about formalizing these structures and finding ways to do that, because I don't think that those structures are in place, or the ones that are in place are not premised on these kind of political values. So when we talk about community also, I mean, that's another term that I think, has to come with, if not conditions, specificity, like who is this community? Why are we coming together? What is it that we're going to do? Rather than kind of always talking about, rather than taking for granted these values of openness, of horizontality, and so forth. Of course, they are all important values, but they're not these universal values. They're not in a kind of bubble. They are in touch with, they are grounded in social realities. And so if we're not addressing those social realities, then we're just kind of building, then it's just rhetoric in a sense, right? So you can purify of the work, I think, but to me, the interest, at least through the Beirut Art Center, is because the Beirut Art Center very much is, has its feet in all kinds of messy puddles. So what happens with that kind of contact, and how do you bridge that between the kind of building a kind of rhetorical politics to putting it in practice? And putting it in practice is a de facto, by nature, something that is a trial and error, that is in progress, that is imperfect, that is impure, and so forth. And so I think this is the kind of stuff that is interesting to me in the work that we're trying to do at the Beirut Art Center. And so this is one of the kind of very seemingly pragmatic and practical tools, but even these very practical tools, something like the yellow pages, it's political, and the work to do is to kind of figure out the politics of these kinds of attempts.
Any question? Yes, one. I mean, I could continue myself.
Yes, I have a question to the three panelists. Since it's about generosity, and if I haven't missed something, we talked a lot about generosity towards communities. And what's missing is the generosity towards society, something that, has not been addressed, or maybe I missed whether you have addressed it. Whereas I find this a very important question, like if we, think about institutions like the Beirut Art Center, like Haven for Artists, also like the Goethe Institute, to whom do we direct the generosity? Is it like, is there something exclusive in the notion of community that we think about, that reflect on? Is there something that is actually not generous by focusing on the notion of community? And I would love to hear actually your view on this. So this kind of tension between serving society, serving something that is less exclusive maybe than a notion of our communities that we have built and that we nurture around our institutions.
Okay, we only have one mic. Adele, if you want to talk, or anyone from Dayna. Adele wants to talk? No. Adele, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Do you want to answer? Did you hear the question about like the fact that we focus on community could be exclusive, because who are these communities? And if we think of society instead of a notion, maybe that's less exclusive. And this tension between society and community.
Like if we want to work like in an advocacy lexicon, let's say, as an organization or as individuals, we have already certain groups that we think about as being historically. Sorry, the internet has cut out.
Yeah, I think it's cutting. Do you want to answer, Dayna, Haig? Or you try again? Adele?
I was talking that if you were focusing on a specific group that has been historically marginalized, so your focus would be with that group, and you are not excluding other groups because they are taking their opportunities. So,
I'll give you an example. So I had a young man come to Haven. He's a cis straight male. And he came into the space, and he's the brother of one of the members, one of the team members. And he looked at it here, he said, "Oh, I thought Haven was super inclusive, but there's only queer and women here." So her response was, "Of course, they have the rest of the world, so you're going to see us clustered in the one space we've got." And that's why servicing a community is also decentralizing this concept of government, the society being servitude. The prisons are built on the concept of you must go rehabilitate and come back for society. It's always about this concept of sacrifice oneself for society, for a nation, it's always sacrifice. And it's never understanding of what are my community needs that therein would no longer make me at odds with society. What are the community values and principles? What are the things that I could raise here that I no longer would be at conflict with a greater society that usually, so the premise of society is built on now of all of us collectively working together to make what happen? Capitalism? To make what happen? The patriarchy? So the concept of society is us deconstructing society now. It's us going, no, this doesn't make any sense. Everything that I've been taught my entire life makes no sense. I am working till I am 70 years old so that I could retire on a pension. To have served who? To have fed who? I don't know. I don't think any of our generation can afford a house. Can any of you thinking about kids? So that's why, to me, the word society, this whole, commit yourself to, is something that was built on the premise of you will reach greatness once you commit, once you sacrifice, when you work really, really, really hard forever. and then you are of servitude to society, you're good enough to be valued enough in society for us to give you your pension, or for us to value you within your taxes, or us to give you health care, or us to give you shelter. So you have to be a valuable, active member, functional, that's my favorite word, functional member of society, because that's the only way society functions, right, at all, is that you've got to function or all of it falls apart. So that's why I think it's extremely important to go back to community, to decentralize. Oh, absolutely. There's a critique on community because it gets fragmented by society. So it gets fragmented by being put into please define yourself. See, that in of itself is a problem, that society is trying to put you in boxes and categories. That's a problem with the binary. But see, it's not a comparison. So it's not you're either a community or you're either a society. That's a very binary way of seeing it. A community exists within a society, and a society exists within notions and beliefs and principles, within an apartheid state, within many things. So you exist within layers of structures that you constitute a society that befit and benefit the people in charge of that society. So society is servitude to whoever is of a higher position, of a higher level, of a higher authority and a higher power. Community is service to one another. So I mean, we can make community evil by putting bad apples in anything. You know, there's bad apples in community and society and anything like that. But to take them and put them next to each other and say these are the juxtaposition of one, they're not. You know, society is, whether we like it or not, the deconstruction of community in order for the servitude of, quote unquote, as we have always heard it since we were kids, the greater good. Who defines that greater good, who rules us and who dictates what good and bad is, that's the problem with society. Is because your good is different than my good. You know, and your access is different than my access. Like she said, you know, we say accessibility, she said it, like she slapped us off the side and she said, well, what is accessibility really? If you are appeasing people that technically don't have access to the basic tools. So to me, community is servitude to the other, society is servitude to a system. And that's something I'm trying to deconstruct.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all been said, but basically this idea that somehow society is this kind of open, horizontal structure is just not true, right? It's an exclusionary structure, just like anything else, and the community doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be like a demographic community. It can be built around a particular practice, and then it can evolve around that practice. But yeah, I think there are certain common values that we have to come together around. Otherwise, I'm not sure what we would be doing. But that's what society is also. I mean, yeah, I guess I don't really know what society means or what you mean by society in this way.
Yeah. I think also I like the idea of proximity that comes with community. So there is more room for direct impact as an individual member, even part of a community rather than a society. Exactly, it's like enacted or enacting like state vision or policy of. So I think that's, yeah, my problem with the term society.
But it's also, again, like just this thing of like just the messy terrain of reality. There's no kind of absolute value of coming together. Like it has to be around a common project, and it can't be also pretending that there are no inherent imbalances within, you know, or that oppression doesn't exist, or that power structures are not there in every interaction that you have. And so the more you define the terms of those interactions and of those common practices, I think the better your chances are of creating some kind of more egalitarian, or at least not fucked up kind of, you know, commonality. Yeah, that excludes some things, and I think that's a good thing.
A question? Because I know we have things to drink outside, so I don't know if we want to continue the conversation outside. Maybe like it will be more informal, but Yani, we hope that one day you can join us, Adele. Yani, yeah. Thank you very much. Inshallah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.